Sharks are the silent rulers of the ocean, their raw power turning the sea into a domain of both awe and terror. Today, we dive into four of the most harrowing shark attacks ever recorded, from the shocking attack that tore a young girl's life apart in seconds to the devastating final moments of a boy enjoying what should have been a carefree surf. These are stories of unimaginable fear and tragedy. There was a calm and sunny afternoon in Middle Harbor, Australia on January 4th. The waters off the estuary shimmered under the light, a tranquil scene framed by the dense brushland that lined the shore. Zeta Steadman, 27, had been looking forward to this day for weeks. Along with her friends, she had planned a picnic at Egg Rock, a picturesque spot nestled in the rugged coastline off the North Shore. The morning had unfolded beautifully. They had arrived on a motor launch, their laughter mingling with the soft hum of the boat's engine as they approached the secluded cove. Middle Harbor was known for its serene waters and abundant wildlife. Despite being relatively enclosed and far from the open ocean, the estuary's connection to Sydney Harbor meant it occasionally saw visits from larger marine creatures. Among these were bull sharks, notorious for their aggressive nature and ability to thrive in both salt and fresh water. Zeta and her friends, aware of the area's reputation, dismissed the risks. After all, the water seemed so inviting, clear, shallow, and harmless. Zeta's day had started early, her excitement evident as she prepared the picnic essentials in her small kitchen. She carefully packed a wicker basket with freshly baked bread, ripe fruit, and other treats. The morning sunlight filtered through the windows, promising a warm and pleasant day. It was a perfect setting for their long-planned outing. By mid-morning, she was on her way to the dock where her friends, Mr. and Mrs. Bose, Mrs. Reeve, and her son-in-law Frederick, waited, already exchanging light-hearted banter. By mid-afternoon, the group had settled into their picnic. The scent of the sea mingled with the aroma of their food. They lounged on blankets spread over the rocky shore, sharing stories and enjoying the stunning views of Middle Harbor. Nearby, cicadas buzzed, their sound blending with the gentle lapping of waves against the rocks. As the day progressed, Zeta, the ever-adventurous one, suggested they cool off with a swim. The others hesitated but eventually agreed, and soon the group was wading into the water, laughing as the coolness contrasted with the heat of the day. At first, they stayed close to the shore, splashing in waist-deep water. But as the minutes passed, Zeta ventured further out, drawn by the clarity of the water and the allure of the deeper blue beyond. She stood in chest-high water, enjoying the gentle sway of the current and the feeling of weightlessness. Her friends, Mr. and Mrs. Bose, called out to her from closer to the shore, cautioning her not to go too far. Zeta waved back, smiling, and began to make her way toward them. Unbeknownst to the group, a predator was already nearby. A 14-foot bull shark, a master of ambush, had silently entered the estuary. Its movements were deliberate, its senses tuned to the vibrations of its surroundings. It had likely been drawn by fish or other prey in the area, but now it had found something else, something larger, more tantalizing. The shark circled Zeta, its shadow passing unseen beneath the surface. It cocked its head slightly, sizing her up. Its movements were patient and calculated. Then, in a sudden burst of speed, it struck. Zeta felt a force like a vice clamp onto her lower body. The water around her exploded into a frenzy of movement and foam. She screamed, her voice piercing the tranquil air and sending her friends into a panic. From the shore, Mrs. Reeve, one of Zeta's friends, watched in horror. Perched on a rocky outcrop, she had a clear view of the attack. She screamed for her son-in-law, Frederick, who had remained on board the motor launch a few feet away from Zeta. Frederick turned to see Zeta thrashing in the water. Without hesitation, he grabbed an oar and dove into the water, swimming toward her with all his strength. Frederick reached Zeta and swung the oar with desperate force, striking the water near the shark's head. The blows made little impact on the determined predator. The shark began pulling Zeta further into deeper waters, the reddish cloud of blood spreading ominously around her. Realizing the oar would not suffice, Frederick swam back to the motor launch and started the engine. He steered the boat toward the shark, aiming to ram it. The boat's hull struck the water with a loud splash, narrowly missing the predator. The shark released Zeta momentarily but lunged again, dragging her further into deeper waters. Frederick leaped from the boat, grabbing hold of Zeta's arm with a strength born of desperation. He pulled her toward him. The shark resisted, thrashing violently, but Frederick's grip held firm. Finally, with a sickening tear, the shark relinquished its hold. Frederick pulled Zeta's torso onto the boat, but the lower half of her body was gone. The water around them was stained red. Zeta was unresponsive, her skin pale, her breathing shallow. Frederick called to the others on shore to call for help. The motor launch sped toward the nearest dock, but it was clear to all on board that Zeta's chances were slim. By the time they reached land and paramedics arrived, she was gone. In the days that followed, the attack sent shockwaves through the community. Reports of the incident dominated local news, and authorities issued warnings about sharks in Middle Harbor. The bull shark that attacked Zeta had ventured into the estuary, taking advantage of the shallow, warm waters that provide the perfect hunting grounds for this species. Bull sharks thrive in such environments, where their ability to adapt to low visibility and diverse prey makes them one of the most dangerous predators in these areas. But shark attacks aren't limited to shallow waters. At Alligator Head, a popular diving spot, Robert Lyle and his friend, Gerald Lyle, set out for a routine abalone dive. What they encountered deep beneath the surface was far more terrifying. A massive predator protecting its domain in a way that would leave scars not just on the survivors, but on the entire diving community. It was June 14, 1959. The morning sky over La Jolla Cove was a patchwork of clouds, gray and heavy, with the occasional break of sunlight shimmering on the water's surface. Robert Pamperin stood by his kitchen window, studying the horizon. The weather was less than ideal. The ocean reflected the dull sky above, but Robert and his friend Gerald had been planning this trip for weeks. Nothing short of a storm would deter them. The plan was straightforward: hunt for abalone off Alligator Head. Abalone were prized for their tender flesh and lustrous shells, fetching high prices in markets and restaurants. These large mollusks, native to cold waters along the Pacific coast of North America, were a delicacy. Harvesting them wasn't easy. Abalone clung tightly to rocks and preferred hiding in dark crevices during the day. Robert and Gerald knew the challenges, but they hoped their efforts would lead to a worthwhile haul. By mid-afternoon, Robert and Gerald, accompanied by their girlfriends, arrived at La Jolla Cove. The beach, as always, was busy with families and swimmers. The girlfriends found a small patch of sand near the rocky tide pools, while Robert and Gerald began readying their gear. Robert carried blue swim fins, a black mask, gloves, and an abalone iron with a yellow handle attached to an inner tube. A burlap sack would hold their catch. The two men inspected their equipment with the precision born of habit. Free diving required minimal gear but demanded stamina and skill. Robert knew the risks well. Any experienced diver did. But the waters near La Jolla Cove had a reputation for safety. There had never been a fatal shark attack in the area, and the allure of the hunt outweighed any lurking concerns. By 5 o'clock p.m., with the tide beginning to rise, Robert and Gerald waded into the water near Alligator Head. The cool waves broke against their legs as they adjusted their masks and dove below the surface. Visibility was poor, no more than 20 feet, and the muted light gave the rocky sea a shadowy cast. They moved methodically, diving and surfacing in turn, searching for abalone clinging to rocks. Each dive brought up more shells, their sacks growing heavier with the rewards of their labor. Unbeknownst to them, the water had become a perfect hunting ground, not just for the two friends, but for something far more dangerous. Earlier that day, divers had speared yellowtail fish nearby, leaving vibrations and traces of blood that could attract predators. A U.S. Navy sailor had also suffered a deep laceration on the rocks, his blood spilling into the water, adding to the danger. A dead whale carcass had washed ashore less than 3,300 feet away the night before. Its fluids, carried by the currents, created a scent trail that could lure large sharks from far away. The swell began to push the two men apart. They drifted farther with each dive until a gap of 30 to 50 feet separated them. Neither thought much of it. Both were confident swimmers, and their focus remained on the hunt. It happened without warning. Beneath Robert, a dark outline of a great white shark emerged from the depths. At over 20 feet long, it was an anomaly for these waters. Drawn by the scent and vibrations of the day's earlier activity, the shark surged upward, jaws wide, striking Robert with a force that churned the water red. Robert's scream pierced the air, a single desperate cry that startled Gerald. He turned in time to see his friend lifted out of the water, the shark clamped around his lower body. At first, Gerald thought it might be a cramp or a rogue wave, but the crimson stain spreading through the water told a more horrifying story. Gerald swam toward the commotion, his mind struggling to process the scene. Robert thrashed, his arms flailing as he tried to free himself. The shark shook its massive head, tearing deeper into its prey. Gerald dove beneath the surface, hoping to help, but the predator's size and power were overwhelming. It was no use. The shark dragged Robert into deeper waters, leaving only a spreading stain of blood in its wake. Panic overtook Gerald. He surfaced, gasping for air, and swam frantically toward the shore. His shoves drew the attention of lifeguards, who quickly organized a search. 10 experienced divers entered the water, combing the area for any sign of Robert, but found nothing. On the beach, their girlfriends stood in total shock, devastated by what was happening. As night fell, the search was called off, and the ocean remained silent about what had transpired beneath its surface. The next day, a swim fin washed ashore, its edges marked by jagged tears. The initials RP were carved into the rubber, a grim confirmation of Robert's fate. Witnesses, including a man perched on a nearby rock, corroborated Gerald's account. A great white shark had attacked Robert. Yet some in the community clung to the notion of a killer whale, unwilling to believe such a predator could lurk so close to their cherished cove. Speculation about the attack's causes ran rampant. Investigators pieced together a series of events: the speared yellowtail, the sailor's bleeding wound, the nearby harbor seals, and the drifting whale carcass. Each factor played a role in drawing the shark into waters where such creatures were rarely seen. Over a year later, in November 1960, a skeleton was discovered at the bottom of a submarine canyon 2,130 feet offshore. The coroner identified the remains as Robert, bringing a semblance of closure to his family. For Gerald, the memory was sharp and unyielding. Robert's face, stricken with terror, lingered in his mind, as did the violent churning of the water that swallowed him. Yet Robert wasn't the only one to encounter the merciless nature of sharks. These predators do not discriminate, not even against the young. For 15-year-old Kai Cowie, a carefree day of surfing with his father turned into a harrowing ordeal. From the depths, a shark struck without warning, its sudden attack reducing the tranquil scene to blood and chaos. It was a clear summer morning in Adelaide, the air cool enough to make you shiver for a moment, but the warmth of the day was already starting to settle in. Kai, just 15 years old, stood at the edge of the Southern Adelaide Surf Club, gazing out over the bay. His eyes, still wide with the youthful energy of someone who had just come into his own as a surfer, followed the rhythmic dance of the waves. His love for the ocean ran deep, far deeper than any of the other sports he had tried over the years. From soccer to basketball, surfing was his true passion, his lifeblood. He had started early, joining the Micrograms Junior Surf Club at 7. His love for the sport was unquestionable, and by the time he was 10, he was already competing for Seaview Road Board Riders, one of the oldest clubs in the country. His family, always supportive, was quick to load up the car for road trips to competitions. Their weekends were filled with the hum of the car on long drives, the sound of laughter, and the satisfaction of being near the water. But no journey, no competition would come to define Kai's life like the one he took on December 28, 2023. It was supposed to be a family holiday, a brief escape from their everyday lives. The York Peninsula, with its well-known surf spots, seemed like the perfect place for a family arrived at Eel Beach with high hopes for a good session. The skies, however, were overcast, the clouds hanging low and heavy above the sea. Still, Kai wasn't about to back down. Had surfed in worse conditions. The ocean was his domain, no matter the weather. The waves at Ethel's Ledge were known for being challenging, an ideal spot for a surfer of Kai's ability. But on this day, the conditions weren't great. Still, Kai paddled out, with his father close behind him, determined to make the most of the opportunity. The water, cold and gray, seemed more ominous than usual, but Kai ignored the nagging feeling that had begun to creep in. Far beneath the surface, something else was stirring. The shark, a great white weighing in at over 700 kilograms, was hunting. It moved silently through the murky depths, its keen senses alert to the presence of prey. The shark was not hunting out of hunger, but out of instinct, an opportunistic feeder waiting for a moment to strike. Kai's father, older but still fit, was trailing behind as his son cut through the water. Kai was agile, carving through the waves with ease, while his father struggled to keep up. For him, these moments were about more than the sport, it was about the shared experience, the road trips with his son, the time spent together. Yet, as they surfed, they were unaware of the true danger lurking in the water. At 1:30 in the afternoon, Kai paddled past the breakers, ready for another wave. The shark, sensing the movement above, zeroed in on its target with ruthless precision. It shot upward, its jaws gaping wide. The first strike was brutal. Kai was knocked off his board, and before he could react, the shark's teeth sank deep into his leg. The force of the attack pulled him under the surface. Kai's heart raced, his mind scrambling to understand what was happening. His father, having just caught a wave, turned back at the sound of his son's cry. His eyes locked onto the scene unfolding in the water, his son struggling, being dragged under by the enormous shark. The realization hit him like a punch to the gut. He couldn't reach him in time. His son, the one he had spent years training and growing alongside, was being torn apart by a creature from the deep. Kai fought with every ounce of strength he had, the pain in his leg excruciating as the shark tightened its grip. His father's voice reached him, urging him to swim to shore. The boy's eyes were wide with fear, but the blood loss was already starting to take its toll. The water around him turned crimson as the shark's grip severed an artery, draining Kai of the strength he needed to make it to safety. Tim Phillips, a local surfer perched on the cliffs above, watched the scene unfold. His heart raced as he saw the desperate struggle below. Without a second thought, he grabbed a board and dove into the water, paddling furiously toward the boy. The shark, its predatory instincts still sharp, circled Kai, waiting for him to weaken. Tim's thoughts were a blur as he reached the unconscious boy. The water was thick with the smell of blood, and every instinct told him to retreat, but Kai needed him. Just as Tim grabbed the boy and attempted to swim him to safety, the shark circled again. It was massive, its dark body looming beneath the water. Tim's pulse hammered in his chest, but he knew he had no choice. He had to get Kai back to shore. With the shark still nearby, he secured the boy onto the board, and they made their way back to the beach. By the time they reached the shallows, others had arrived to help. But despite their efforts, despite the rush of emergency services, it was too late. Kai, still limp on the sand, had lost too much blood. The boy who had carved through waves with such ease, who had loved the ocean more than anything, had succumbed to his injuries. Kai was the third shark victim in Australian waters that year. The surfing community, stunned by the loss of such a young, promising talent, rallied around his family. The heartbreak was immeasurable. Kai's love for the sea, for surfing, had come at a cost. But those who knew him would never forget the way he lived, the way he embraced life with every wave he caught, every moment he shared with his family and friends. What he loved more than anything in the world, more than surfing, was his family. He had grown up surfing with his uncle and spent huge amounts of time with his younger brother, Jet. They had laughed together, played together, surfed together. It was the family road trips, the hours spent in the car traveling for competitions, that his father cherished the most. Just being with his son, talking, sharing the ride. It was these moments that would now be haunted by the loss of his son. At his memorial service on Safeford Beach, surfers gathered in a solemn circle in the water, a silent tribute to the boy taken too soon. Kai's family, his father, mother, and younger brother, stood at the center, surrounded by those who loved him. They chanted his favorite words, "Just one more wave." As if moved by their grief, the sea swelled gently, its waves rolling in as if to bid a final farewell to a boy who would never be forgotten. But the sea's ruthlessness knows no boundaries. Thousands of miles away, on Australia's west coast, another tragedy was about to unfold. A young skipper, living his dream of guiding tourists through the turquoise waters, was unknowingly on the brink of disaster. A single jump would be all it took for his life to change forever. It was a clear, sunny day when Jeffrey Brayer steered the Matrix, an 80-foot catamaran, into the turquoise waters off Pelican Island. On board were 12 passengers eager to experience the untouched beauty of Australia's western coastline. For Jeffrey, this day marked another step toward realizing his dream of making a living from the ocean, a passion he had held since childhood. He had been introduced to the sea before he could walk, spending his early years on boats with his parents. Growing up, his love for surfing, diving, and sailing deepened, but he wasn't sure how to turn it into a career. When Matrix Ocean Adventures hired him as a first mate, it felt like fate. Recently, the original skipper had stepped down, and Jeffrey was offered the chance to take the helm for the Matrix maiden voyage. He accepted the challenge with quiet pride, determined to prove himself. The Matrix was a luxury catamaran, 80 feet long, with 6 private cabins, a spacious deck, and modern amenities. The 13-day journey began in Perth, following the rugged coastline all the way to Broome. Along the way, the passengers enjoyed secluded bays, snorkeling in crystal-clear waters, and breathtaking scenery that Jeffrey knew well. On this day, they had reached the southeast corner of Pelican Island, a spot known as Wreck Point. It was early afternoon, and the group had just finished lunch. Jeffrey carefully maneuvered the catamaran into position and dropped anchor. The Abrolhos Islands, famous for their vibrant coral reefs and marine life, lay beneath the water's surface. Parrotfish, wrasses, and groupers darted through the corals, while sea turtles grazed lazily. The drop-off, where the shallow reef gave way to the deep blue, was a favorite snorkeling spot. Jeffrey handed out masks and snorkels, explaining the underwater wonders. The passengers, eager and excited, prepared to enter the water. Jeffrey joined them, lowering himself into the warm, clear sea. As Jeffrey swam, the underwater world unfolded before him. Fish shimmered in the sunlight, weaving through vibrant coral formations. Sea anemones swayed gently, their tentacles dancing with the rhythm of the ocean. Near the edge of the drop-off, Jeffrey spotted a large sea turtle grazing on the coral. He waved to Rod Plug, one of the passengers nearby, signaling for him to take a closer look. Rod started toward Jeffrey, but noticed water leaking into his mask. He stopped to adjust it, using a standard diver's hand signal to indicate he was heading back to the boat. Jeffrey glanced up briefly and saw the gesture, acknowledging it with a quick wave before turning his focus back to the reef, unaware of the dark shadow rising from the depths below. As Rod swam toward the Matrix, he tightened his mask, adjusting it against his face. The peaceful silence of the ocean surrounded him until a sudden splash behind him shattered the stillness. Startled, he turned just in time to see the water churn violently. In an instant, a massive shark, jaws wide open, surged upward and slammed into Jeffrey. The shark was estimated to be around 20 feet long. Eyewitnesses later described it as having a dark back and pale underside, with a dorsal fin about 3 feet high. With incredible force, the shark's bite severed Jeffrey's body in two. Blood spread through the water as the shark thrashed its head from side to side, holding on to Jeffrey. The snorkelers nearby froze, watching the chaos unfold. Panic swept through them as they swam desperately toward the catamaran. Their adrenaline surged, pushing them forward. Reaching the ladder, they scrambled aboard, breathless and in shock, trembling with fear. The crew quickly accounted for everyone else. No one else had been injured, but the passengers were in shock. From the deck, They could see the dark silhouette of the shark below the surface carrying away half of Jeffy's body. It moved with eerie calm, disappearing into the depths. Minutes later, the shark reappeared. Its snout and eyes broke the surface near Jeffy's remains. It moved slowly, opening its jaws once more and seizing the rest of Jeffy's body. Then, with a swirl of water, it vanished, leaving only silence behind. The crew radioed authorities, reporting the attack and requesting help. Emergency services advised them to return to Girton immediately. The Matrix motored toward the mainland, its passengers silent and pale. Word of the incident spread quickly, and local fishermen and tourists were warned to stay out of the water. Police and fisheries officers launched a search for the shark, hoping to recover Jeffy's remains for a coroner's report. Helicopters and patrol boats circled the wreck point for hours, but the strong currents carried away any trace of the tragedy. By sunset, the search was called off. Rory McCall, a shark researcher, explained that there was no clear reason for the shark's appearance. There had been no fishing nearby, and the snorkelers hadn't been chumming in the water. However, the proximity to the continental shelf, where deep water predators often hunt, made shark encounters possible. Great whites are known to traverse the western coast of Australia, though sightings near coral reefs are rare. Jeffy's death shocked the tight-knit maritime community. Friends and colleagues remembered him as a man whose love for the ocean was matched by his kindness and generosity. His father described him as a carefree and dedicated young man who had turned his passion into a career. The passengers and crew of the Matrix struggled to process the tragedy, haunted by the memory of the once peaceful waters turning red. While shark attacks in Australian waters are rare, this event was a stark reminder that the ocean is wild and unpredictable. For Jeffy Brazier, the sea that had been his sanctuary became, in an instant, the source of his untimely end. In the days that followed, Jeffy's family received countless messages of sympathy. His father recalled how many friends Jeffy had made, noting his ability to connect with everyone he met. The attack had left a deep wound in the community. No one had expected such a tragedy in such a beautiful, serene place. Thank you for joining us as we uncovered the unpredictable and terrifying power of sharks, a chilling reminder of the danger lurking beneath the surface. Still hungry for more? Don't worry, we're not done yet. In our next story, we've got a compilation of the most horrifying shark attacks in history, each one more chilling than the last. You won't want to miss what happens next. Click to watch the full compilation.